Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The house already felt like chaos before I even stepped fully inside. 3 kids screaming over a cartoon remote, cereal splattered across the tile floor, juice dripping off the counter like no one gave a damn about anything, and my sister yelling from somewhere deep inside the house, asking where her goddamn phone charger was again. I stood in the entryway with my suitcase in one hand, passport in the other, wearing the same sundress I'd bought months ago with that exact trip in mind. Greece. My graduation trip. A tiny little promise I'd held onto through all those exhausting nights of classes and double shifts, through the years of sacrificing my own life while watching everyone else live theirs. I glanced at the framed photo by the door, Mom, Dad, Marla, and me, taken when I still had a spark in my eyes. Back when I believed family meant something more than obligation and manipulation. I took a breath, rolled my shoulders back, and started toward the kitchen. But I didn't make it past the hallway before I heard it, Marla's voice, smug and careless as ever. "Oh, look who's all dressed up like she's going somewhere fancy," she said, sauntering out of the kitchen with a coffee mug in one hand and something crumpled in the other. It didn't register at first. I was too focused on the fact that she hadn't even said good morning. No, hey, congrats, no, have a great trip. Just that tone, that damn tone like I was a nuisance. But then my eyes zeroed in on what was in her other hand, my passport. Or at least, what used to be my passport. The edges were blackened, the plastic cover curled from heat, and part of the page had been torn and burnt. And then, without flinching, she dropped it into the kitchen sink like a used napkin. Just like that. "You're stuck here now," she said, laughing as if it was some hilarious joke between sisters, some harmless prank. Then she handed me a baby bottle and said, "Mason's teething again, so good luck with that." I didn't speak. I couldn't speak. There's a kind of silence that builds in your chest when betrayal hits so deep it steals your breath before your voice. My hands were trembling, but not from fear, rage, pure and white-hot. Years of biting my tongue, of being the one who stayed behind, who canceled plans, who picked up the kids after school, who sacrificed college parties, boyfriends, and job offers to be the helpful aunt. It all collapsed in that one moment. Reduced to ash just like my passport. Marla walked away without a second thought, shouting something about needing to pick up dry cleaning and maybe getting her nails done if she had time. The door slammed behind her like a punchline. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the sink, the smell of burnt plastic still lingering in the air, and I swear something cracked inside me. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Like a string snapping under too much pressure. That's the thing people never see when someone like me finally reaches their limit. They're so used to you swallowing the anger, staying quiet, being the good one, that they never notice when you start looking at the exits. Now tell me this, have you ever had someone in your family treat your time, your life, like it was disposable? Like their needs were always more important than your plans? Tell me in the comments, who is that person for you? I moved slowly, like I was in a dream. I took the baby bottle, set it gently on the counter, then walked upstairs to my room. My suitcase was still packed, sitting right there like a cruel joke. But I didn't unpack it. I didn't cry either. I just stood there, staring at it for a while, thinking about how long I'd waited to feel like I owned even a single piece of my life. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the old wooden drawer in my closet, the one with all my old college notebooks, postcards I never sent, and receipts for trips I never took. I pulled out a second duffel bag and started packing it, this time not for Greece, but for something bigger. Something quieter. Something that had nothing to do with airports or beachside cocktails, but everything to do with walking away from a life that never belonged to me in the first place. I wasn't even sure where I was going yet, but I knew I was done being the backup plan, the babysitter, the punching bag. I wasn't going to scream or throw things or demand apologies. No, that would have been too easy for her. Too familiar. What I was planning would speak louder than anything I could ever say to her face. And that night, when the house finally went quiet and the kids were asleep and the world outside the window was still, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the burned edges of my ruined passport. And for the first time in a long time, I smiled. Because I knew something Marla didn't. This wasn't the end of my trip. It was the beginning of something she could never control. The funny thing about rage is that it doesn't always come roaring in like a thunderstorm, screaming and slamming doors. It can slide in quietly, settle into your bones like a slow, creeping cold, and sit there until you start to forget what warmth ever felt like. That's exactly how I felt the next morning when I got up before the sun, long before the kids started crying and the cartoons started blaring from the living room. I didn't wake up with fire in my chest or some melodramatic scream stuck in my throat. I woke up calm, eerily calm, like something inside me had finally gone still after years of turbulence. It wasn't peace, exactly. It was something colder, something sharper. A kind of clarity that only comes when you realize you've been the fool for far too long. I walked downstairs and made breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, just like always. The baby started crying halfway through, and I picked him up like it was second nature, because it was. I knew the rhythm of their cries, the sounds they made when they were hungry versus tired, the way the oldest one liked his apple slices without skin, and how the middle one only drank milk if it had strawberry syrup in it. I wasn't their mother, but hell, sometimes it felt like I was more of a parent than Marla had ever been. And standing there, one arm bouncing the baby while flipping eggs with the other, it all started hitting me like waves pounding on the shore. I remembered being 19 and skipping a college Halloween party because Marla had a mental health emergency and needed me to babysit for just one night. That night turned into a whole weekend, and by Monday, I had missed a midterm and a chance to meet with a professor who could have helped me get into an advanced program. I remembered the job interview I bailed on because Marla's sitter canceled last minute, and she swore I was the only one she could trust. I remembered the guy I really liked, the one who asked me to take a weekend trip to Lake Tahoe, and how I turned him down because Marla begged me to watch the kids while she went out of town with some guy she'd met on Tinder, claiming it was the first time she felt seen in months. And I remembered every single time I bit my tongue and told myself, she's just overwhelmed, or family helps family, or it's just this once. Except it was never just once. It was always again, and again, and again. Like a loop I couldn't climb out of, a cycle I didn't even realize I was trapped in until it was far too late. Marla never forced me, not in the obvious way. She used guilt like a weapon, dressed it up in pity and desperation, and aimed it straight at my softest spots. I was always the one who stepped in, because she knew I would. She knew I'd drop everything. She counted on it. But something shifted in me that day, as I wiped the baby's spit up off my shoulder and handed the toast to the oldest without even looking. I moved through the motions so smoothly it was like I wasn't even present. I cleaned the dishes, packed their lunches, tied shoelaces, found missing socks, kissed foreheads. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because smiling was easier than speaking. Smiling meant I didn't have to explain the quiet fury simmering beneath my skin, the way every second of obedience now felt like a betrayal of my own life. Marla strolled in sometime mid-morning, still in pajamas, sipping coffee like she'd had the night of her life. She looked around the kitchen like she'd forgotten she lived with 3 tiny hurricanes and the one woman who kept it all from exploding. She gave me a half-hearted, thanks, and disappeared upstairs again without a second glance. And that's when I knew it wasn't just about the passport. The burnt document was just the final insult in a long line of them. It was never about one trip, it was about the fact that I was never meant to have a life outside of hers. That night, after the kids were asleep and the house was finally quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound, and the glow of the screen lit up my tired face. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just typed. How to get a replacement passport in under 24 hours. And there it was. My next step, clear as day. Because this time, I wasn't waiting for permission. The next morning arrived with the same dull rhythm, the kind that sinks into your bones and makes every hour feel heavier than the one before it. The baby was already fussing before the sun was even fully up, and the middle one had spilled orange juice across the kitchen table before I'd had a chance to finish pouring cereal into their bowls. Marla came downstairs sometime around 10, dragging her slippers like the floor offended her, and barely glanced at me before announcing she was heading out again. Some errands, maybe a nail appointment, possibly stopping by a friend's house, you know. Important things that apparently couldn't be done with your own damn kids in tow. She left without so much as a thank you or a nod of acknowledgement, just grabbed her handbag and disappeared, the front door slamming shut behind her like the period at the end of a bitter sentence. I stood in the hallway for a minute, just breathing, trying not to scream or punch a hole in the drywall. It was the fourth day in a row she'd dumped the kids on me without asking, and it was starting to feel less like a favor and more like a prison sentence. And maybe I could have swallowed it down one more time. Maybe I could have played the martyr just a little longer, but then I noticed something that made my stomach turn. As I gathered the laundry from the floor outside her room, the door cracked open just enough to catch a glimpse inside, and what I saw stopped me cold. Tucked in the corner by her vanity were two large shopping bags, shiny, high-end, brand-name logos printed in bold, elegant letters, the kind of bags that don't come from clearance racks or discount outlets. Curious, I stepped closer and peered inside. A brand-new handbag, still wrapped in tissue paper, a pair of stilettos that probably cost more than I'd made in a week, and a receipt tucked neatly between them. $700 spent on crap she didn't need. The same week she'd cried to me about not being able to afford a babysitter so she could recharge her mental health. I felt something rise up in my chest that didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like disgust. Like a bitter taste that had been building slowly over the years and now finally had nowhere else to go but out. She had lied straight to my face, manipulated me with that whiny, helpless act she loved to play, and all the while she'd been splurging on designer crap while I scrubbed her kitchen and wiped her kid's nose. I knew I shouldn't go further, but I did. I walked over to her nightstand, opened the top drawer, the same drawer where I'd seen her shove my burned passport 2 nights ago, and underneath a stack of old bills and crumpled receipts, I found it. A thick, folded envelope, rubber-banded shut and labeled in her handwriting, "Emergency cash." I opened it and I swear I almost laughed. $1,000, maybe more, in crisp 20s and 50s, all carefully stacked and hidden away like some secret war chest she'd never planned to use unless it benefited her directly. That was the moment I stopped planning an exit and started planning revenge. I didn't even think about it. My hands moved before my mind did. I slipped half the cash into my bra, not because I needed it, but because it was mine now. It was repayment. Compensation for every sleepless night, every canceled plan, every time she left me holding the weight of her life like it was my responsibility to keep it from falling apart. I didn't take it all. That would have been too easy. I wanted her to feel the loss, but not know exactly how much. I wanted her to squirm, to wonder, to question whether someone had stolen from her or whether she'd simply miscounted. That kind of uncertainty leaves a person more unsettled than outright theft ever could. Then I walked into my room, pulled out a piece of plain white stationery from my drawer, and started writing. No anger. No theatrics. Just the truth. Every word a blade, every sentence a quiet scream. I poured years of silence into that letter, not to hurt her, but to make her finally see who I had become beneath the weight of her needs. When I finished, I folded the paper neatly and slipped it into an envelope, sealing it with a piece of tape and writing, in small, sharp letters on the front, "Read this only after I'm gone." Because I wasn't just walking away anymore, I was taking something back that she could never replace. Night settled over the house like a heavy blanket, the kind of stillness that only comes after chaos has finally worn itself out. The children were asleep upstairs, their breathing soft and even, their small bodies tangled in blankets that smelled faintly of apple shampoo and chocolate-stained pajamas. I stood at the foot of the stairs for a long moment, just listening to that sound, the sound of peace, the kind that never lasted long in this house, but tonight felt strangely final. The lights in the hallway flickered slightly, the way they always did when the dryer kicked on, but I didn't move to fix it. I wasn't here to fix anything anymore. Marla still hadn't come home, and I wasn't surprised in the slightest. She was probably out with some man who thought her tired eyes and fake vulnerability were endearing, who hadn't yet learned that her damsel in distress act was just a mask for manipulation. Maybe she was drinking overpriced cocktails somewhere, laughing about how clever she was for trapping me again, so sure that I'd be waiting here like always, folding laundry and wiping noses while she lived like a free woman. But she didn't know this time was different. She didn't know that everything had already shifted beneath her feet, and by the time she realized it, I'd be gone. I walked through the house one last time, not rushing, not hiding, just observing. The kitchen counters were spotless, dishes washed and stacked neatly beside the sink, lunches packed and labeled in the fridge for tomorrow's school drop-off. The living room was clean, the toys sorted into their plastic bins, the remote control placed exactly where Marla liked it, though she'd never thanked me once for keeping this place from collapsing under its own weight. I moved through each room like a ghost, touching things I'd once cared about, leaving behind little signs that I'd been here, but no longer belonged. In my bedroom, I opened the closet and looked at the empty hangers swaying slightly from where I'd pulled my clothes earlier. The room looked sterile now, like a hotel room after checkout, no personality, no trace of the woman who'd slept there night after night, crying silently into her pillow while the weight of someone else's life smothered her own. I placed my house key on the desk beside the lamp, alongside the sealed envelope I'd written the night before. I adjusted the envelope slightly, just enough to make sure it would be the first thing Marla noticed when she walked in. I wanted her to see it before anything else, before the empty bed, before the silence, before the echo of her own consequences. But the cash wasn't the only thing I took when I decided to leave. I wanted her to feel it in places that couldn't be fixed by money or apologies. So I went back into her room, opened the second drawer of her vanity, and took the silver locket she wore only on special occasions, the one our mother gave her before she died, the one Marla always claimed held sentimental value, though she never treated anything in her life with actual care. It wasn't about the locket itself, it was about what it represented. It was the only thing in that house that held real emotional weight for her, the only object she hadn't replaced with something flashy and hollow. I slipped it into my coat pocket without hesitation. Let her feel the sting of absence, let her finally know what it was like to lose something irreplaceable. When I walked out the front door, I didn't slam it. I didn't glance back. I didn't wait for guilt to creep in or for second thoughts to claw at me. I just walked away, down the driveway, out to the street, into the night air that smelled like damp leaves and quiet relief. No shouting, no tears, no drama. Just freedom, clean, quiet, final. The house disappeared behind me with each step, and with it, every version of myself that had ever lived for someone else's comfort. I felt the cool metal of the locket in my pocket, the weight of the cash against my ribs, and for the first time in years, I felt light. Not because I'd escaped her, but because I'd reclaimed something she'd tried to convince me I didn't deserve my life. Hours later, while I sat in a diner 2 towns over, sipping burnt coffee and waiting for a ride to the airport, Marla finally came home. I imagined her walking into the house, heels clicking on the hardwood, expecting to see me in the kitchen, maybe annoyed, maybe exhausted, but always there. But there was no Kate. No noise. No familiar routine. Just silence. Just emptiness. And then, the envelope. She opened it. And I like to think she gasped. The letter wasn't written in anger, and that was exactly what made it hit harder than anything else could have, because fury can be dismissed, yelled back at, torn apart with the same old arguments and excuses, but calm clarity leaves no room to hide. It doesn't scream, it doesn't beg, it just exists with the weight of undeniable truth, and truth, real, unflinching truth, is the one thing people like Marla can't ever fight against. I imagined her sitting down at the kitchen table, the envelope torn open in her impatient hands, her face tightening as her eyes moved down each line. Maybe she expected a tantrum on paper, a guilt trip in reverse, a plea for her to feel something like regret. But that's not what I gave her. I gave her something colder, something more precise. I gave her every word she never wanted to hear but could no longer ignore. I started the letter simply, no apologies, no softening the blow. I told her exactly what she'd done, not just burning my passport, not just trapping me with her kids again, but every single time she weaponized guilt and responsibility against me like it was some sacred duty I'd been born to fulfill. I wrote about the nights she cried to me on the phone, claiming she was at her breaking point, only to post pictures the next day with champagne glasses and hashtags about living her best life. I told her about the job opportunities one let go of, the relationships I never pursued, the days I watched life pass by through a kitchen window while she ran off to play the victim to anyone who'd listen. I reminded her of the first time she dropped the kids on me for a quick errand that turned into a whole weekend, and how I ended up missing my college internship orientation because of it. I reminded her of the birthdays she forgot, mine, not the kids, the way she always had excuses, always a reason why her world was more chaotic, more demanding, more deserving of leniency. And through every line, I didn't lash out. I didn't accuse her with venom. I simply laid it bare like facts on a table. And facts don't lie. They just sit there, unmovable. Then I explained how I used the very cash she hid in her drawer, the money she said didn't exist, to buy a replacement passport. I didn't even have to lie or forge anything. There are services for people who lose important documents in unexpected emergencies, and it turns out, being trapped in a house with a burned passport counts as one. I told her I booked my ticket to Athens the same day she left me with the kids again, and that by the time she was reading this, I'd already be halfway to the airport, free, finally free, from the quiet hell she'd turned my life into. But that wasn't the end of the letter. That wasn't even the part that would haunt her. I told her calmly, honestly, without spite, that I'd made one more phone call before I left. An anonymous call. A simple report to Child Protective Services. I told them about the number of times Marla had left her children alone with no notice, about the nights she didn't come home, about how she never arranged real childcare because she always assumed I'd be there to fill in. I told them how she justified her absence with vague excuses and how she refused to acknowledge that parenting meant more than just giving birth. I didn't do it to punish her, and I made that clear. I did it because I love those kids. Because they deserve better than a mother who only shows up when there's someone else doing the hard parts. I didn't want her to lose them. I wasn't trying to destroy her life. I was trying to force her to look at it. Really look at it, without her filters, without her drama, without her damn excuses. Maybe CPS wouldn't do anything. Maybe they'd just show up, check a few boxes, leave a pamphlet on the table, and be done with it. But maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd see what I saw every day, 3 kids surviving under a roof held up by lies and manipulation, and a mother who spent more time in front of her vanity mirror than with her children. I signed the letter without a flourish, without a farewell. Just my name. Kate. And right then, as I imagined the letter slipping from her hands and her stomach tightening in panic, I knew I'd taken back more than just my freedom. I'd taken back the truth. I'd ripped the mask off the face she'd been hiding behind for years and left it on the floor, exposed to the one place she could never control reality. When the knock finally came on the front door, I imagined her walking toward it slowly, the letter still in her hand, dread building in her chest like thunder in the distance. I imagined her opening it, thinking maybe it was me returning in some dramatic fashion, some last-second regret. But instead, it was something colder. Something official. A CPS agent holding a clipboard, wearing a badge, asking to come inside. And in that moment, I hoped she finally understood what it meant to be left truly, completely alone. It didn't take long for everything to start unraveling, not in some spectacular explosion like in the movies, but in quiet. Creeping ripples that started small and spread until everything Marla had worked so hard to pretend was stable began to buckle at the seams. The first ripple came just hours after I left, when the knock on the door finally pulled her out of whatever daze she'd fallen into after reading the letter I left on the counter. The knock that wasn't me coming back with tears in my eyes or second thoughts in my suitcase. It was a woman with a badge and a clipboard, polite but firm, asking questions Marla had no answers for and no way to spin. I wasn't there to see it, but I imagined every detail of how it unfolded. The way Marla's voice probably cracked while she tried to act surprised, feigning confusion, acting like she didn't understand what this visit was about. All while sweat gathered at her temples and the weight of her carefully constructed lies began to press against her from every side. The agent wasn't cruel, wasn't accusing, just clinical, methodical, precise. How many hours are the children left in the care of others? Is there a formal childcare arrangement? Who provides meals, transportation, daily supervision? When was the last time someone outside the family observed the condition of the home and the well-being of the children? The kids, of course, didn't understand what was happening. The oldest might have picked up on the tension, on the way Marla's smile didn't reach her eyes that day, or the way she hovered more than usual, talking fast and laughing too loud. The younger ones just looked around in confusion, sensing something was off, but not knowing why. And the neighbors, oh, the neighbors. People talk, especially in neighborhoods like hers where lawns are trimmed just right and gossip spreads faster than wildfire in a dry field. They saw the government car parked outside. They saw the woman with the clipboard. And the next day, someone asked a question at the bus stop, another whispered a comment in line at the grocery store, and within a week, Marla's reputation wasn't quite as polished as it had been. She tried to fix it, of course. She put on a show, made sure everyone saw her walking the kids to school with a smile, hugging them a little too hard, playing the part she'd neglected for years. But it was already too late. The stain of suspicion lingers long after the moment has passed, and no amount of forced smiles can erase the feeling people get when they sense something isn't right behind closed doors. And then came the second ripple, the one she never saw coming. The copy of the letter I'd sent directly to our parents, timed perfectly to arrive just after the storm had started to gather over her house. They hadn't known the half of it. For years, I'd protected her even from them, choosing silence over conflict, letting them believe I was simply generous and dependable, never telling them about the manipulation, the guilt trips, the nights I'd cried alone while she danced across town like a woman without responsibility. But now they knew. Every word laid bare in black and white, no embellishment, just truth. My mother called her first, of course, I can only imagine that conversation. My father, quieter and colder in his disapproval, probably didn't say much, but his silence always hit harder than a raised voice ever could. And for the first time, Marla didn't have a version of the story that made her look innocent. For the first time, there was nothing left to hide behind. Meanwhile, I sat at a seaside cafe with a chipped mug of bitter coffee and the wind in my hair, watching the waves roll in like time itself was finally moving at the right speed again. I wasn't in Greece. I hadn't even booked the flight. The ticket I'd shown in the letter, the itinerary she probably read twice trying to calculate how far away I'd gone, it was all a fiction, a decoy, a symbol of freedom I never needed to physically pursue to finally claim as my own. I hadn't needed a flight to Athens. I'd needed a reason, an excuse, a boundary she couldn't cross. That trip was never about a destination. It was about a departure, a break from the cycle, a clean exit from a life that never belonged to me in the first place. And the locket, the one thing I did take besides the cash, still sat in the bottom of my bag, untouched, unopened. Not because I needed it or even wanted it, but because it was the only thing she ever claimed to value that wasn't made of money or self-pity. I didn't know if I'd keep it or toss it into the ocean. Maybe I'd bury it in the sand and let the tide claim it, like every memory I was slowly letting drift away with each passing hour. Sometimes you have to burn bridges so the wrong people can't follow you. But sometimes, the fire just shows you who is really standing too close with a match. So now I ask you, honestly and without sugarcoating it, if you were in my shoes, would you have walked away quietly, or would you have burned everything down like I did? I want to hear your take. Don't hold back. Tell me, did I go too far or not far enough?